Cool. Alright, so this is the first diff, or this? I think this is the component model diff, right? Which is
that's the whole
that's the difference between old versus new, correct?
Right.
Yeah, so that's probably the first one we should look at.
Now this is just what we want to add to type converter directly in the near future.
Yeah, so that's basically just the. Oh, interesting. So you know.
Although this.
I see. To do this then.
We weren't sure, like, if some of the stuff should be added to the primitives.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But
so everything is added to component model, to type converter.
yeah.
Okay.
There were some cycles that didn't seem breakable.
Yeah, for the viewers, it might be nice if we start give some context. So basically, this is the idea was that we have currently type converters, which is basically allowing you to extend essentially how things are being parsed, mostly from strings to other data types, but generally speaking from anything to anything, I believe. And then we have this whole underlying framework, which is type descriptors, and there's property descriptors and event descriptors, which is essentially what the designers are using. Specifically the WinForms designer, where you basically bind stuff to property grids, and that controls essentially what things are being visible in. So we want to basically bring in the type descriptor framework because that's what some people depend on. To essentially have it's basically an alternative model to do reflection with more extensibility, to say it simply. And so we tried to originally split it into a new contract called type descriptor, but it didn't work because type converters and type descriptors would have cyclic dependencies. So we said, screw that, we just added to type converter because we consider the whole thing more or less legacy. And we just provide it purely for compat. And so that's basically the contract that you revised, right? So most of the stuff was added to type converter, which is basically our 77 additions. Yes. Maybe we should just start here, I guess. So I think the main type is probably going to be type descriptor, I suppose.
Yeah, the main ones are type descriptor and property descriptor.
Yeah. So we had type descriptor before, but we dummied it out, right? Because we only had this guy here. And now we actually add all the other ones. So that's interesting. The whole thing is static.
Just static on the desktop.
Interesting. So how does it actually work? So basically, how do you get a type descriptor? Like, how do you start? Like, you just view it up, or?
Your default type descriptor is pretty much a reflection. So you can always do reflection over types and get metadata this way.
I see. So you basically,
So static type descriptor that get property does reflection over your properties and returns what it sees.
I see.
When this infrastructure is plugged into the designer adds custom providers, and in this case, type descriptor is doing more than reflection.
So people don't actually extend type descriptor then?
Well,
so basically,
they are.
Provider.
Yeah, that's exactly. So that's the exact. I see. Yeah, so I guess that's exactly because that's what I remembered. So the actual exchange currency is then not type descriptor; it's more the this guy here, right? The the iCustom type descriptor, right? That's the actual thing.
Provider.
The providers I plug it in, but this is the actual thing that does the stuff,
yes.
right? Yep. And I guess there's a default one which just uses reflection, and then you can basically plug in your own. And the default one you basically get by just calling methods on this basically static class.
If no providers. So see the first method, add provider. If that had never been
I see. So it's basically
getting...
ambient based. So you basically register that basically in one giant global table. Yeah, I see. That makes sense.
Where are the concrete type descriptors? How do you get one to start?
Well, I guess you.
We do have a base class in full framework.
So right now, in order to use it, I have to actually derive this and create my own? There's no.
Concrete ones are internal, right?
The provider I'm talking about. The type descriptor provider is where you kind of get the ball rolling, but I don't see how you actually get an instance of
But there's one default one. It's internal, and it's already hooked up to the descriptor.
Yeah, but where do you get access to it?
Through descriptor. You don't need you don't need access to providers.
You don't need access to the provider.
Why?
Not direct.
I guess I'm not sure how you start the process here then.
You call type descriptor get converter, for example.
Are you talking about you can derive from the type description provider, create your own?
Yeah, I was expecting you to have to start with one of those, but I didn't see any way of creating one other than deriving from it. That was what I was getting.
That's what I'm assuming. I have.
Yeah, because you only define your own because you only provide policy, right? Which means if you don't extend it,
Right.
there's
So you don't
really
need
nothing that you
The
do.
key converter is the inject one.
Yeah, I guess you the way you do it is you derive from this guy, you provide your own descriptors. So it means you have to basically provide. The way I see this is basically providing get type, essentially, and then this is basically your type. And so you basically have to implement this guy to hook it up, which can handle either just one type or multiple types.
I see.
And then this guy basically provides your policy.
If you implement a new one, you just call the app provider on type descriptor to pass it through. Sure.
Exactly. Once you have your own, then you have to register it at some point.
I got it.
Which makes sense. God, I've done this literally, I think 10 years ago at this point. I have no idea how I did it back then. Really. So, which means the only types that we really talk about is we have the descriptor, which is this guy, the provider. Property descriptors is probably the next one that's maybe worth looking at.
Were there any dependencies I guess we can look at that in a minute, but were there any APIs that you had to remove due to dependencies, other dependencies? Or were they pretty much just bring all of them?
They pretty much just all came over directly to type converter like this.
So which means you also have property descriptor before, it just
We had an empty type.
yeah, so we all stopped it out, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that empty type because it from some abstract.
Yeah, then we have all the beautiful collections. I guess the other one would be event descriptor. Interesting. Event descriptor has nothing, right?
That's nothing that we need to add in the short term. We just need the class as a stub. In the longer term diff, you'll see the rest of the class there.
Okay.
For display name attribute, can we put that into component model itself? I know there's lots of people who've asked for it just in general uses outside of type converter. So it's just a little marker attribute.
Most of the attributes have no dependencies on anything, and so they can be put pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, so we should probably just move that to system component model.
Component model or primitives?
The primitives one is system component model, and we don't have that primitives one right now.
Oh,
I
I
thought
thought
I
it
saw
was.
that primitives.
That's another
Okay,
contract.
then
yeah.
look at that. I thought it was just component
Yeah.
model. Maybe it's primitives.
Yeah, there's a pile of attributes that are dependent on nothing but system.attributes, so they can go anywhere.
Then you said you stepped out events basically because nobody asked for it yet, or was there any
Yeah, because
complexity?
in the scenario we were looking at, it wasn't needed just except as a subclass to get another dependency going.
But
So
so
they-
what's the cost of just filling in the blanks for event descriptor? Because one of the concerns is if we keep adding APIs like this piecemeal, it's randomization, and then also we need to change potentially standard lib version if we add new
This
APIs.
is definitely for compat reasons, so if there's not a dependency reason, we should just bring the APIs
Yeah.
forward as long as
And
there's
there's
not
an
cross-field,
additional-
there's no-
Yeah, there's an additional diff that has everything.
Yeah.
That just had a lot more. So this is the stuff that we wanted more short term because we had scenarios that this actually used. Make sure we got some of the patterns right for how to bring things over, and then we can look at the.
That makes sense.
But what do you mean by short and long term?
Well,
What's the
this-
difference between short and long term?
We would intend to add this directly. We would go to work on bringing this over as soon as possible. And then for the rest of the namespace, there are a lot of types, a lot of questions about where we would put them ultimately.
Well, but I understand. So if there's something like, very different from the types that are here, yes, you need to make decisions. But something like filling in the blanks in the event descriptor, well, there's no decision to be made. It's like,
It's part of type converter.
We
can
just
just
have
that and stuff. So this is.
and
I don't think there's any real reason not to.
okay, could we do it in the short term? And I understand there will be long term about like new different things, but if it's more of the same, I would just do it now.
Sure.
You have one of these. We did it.
So that makes sense. And we have very quickly, let's take a look. Attribute collection, display name we talked about, event we talked about, member descriptors, probably a good one to look at, although it doesn't have much.
Right. So you can see everything.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever that is. I don't want to know. What's the description, collection?
So,
Property descriptor would be interesting.
Yeah,
That's probably the main thing that I would use.
That's one we just looked at.
and Emo?
Yeah.
We do have a reference assembly that has like the long-term plan, like everything added. If we want to swap out in this diff, swap that out, so then we could see what would be added from the current net core implementation to what we're looking at adding, like the full collection of it.
Okay, let's do that.
The GitHub issue also has that diff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We weren't sure exactly.
Issue, but it was like pages and pages of PIs. I was like, oh.
That's one of the reasons why we created this version, like the short versus long term, just because of the quantity of it. So we didn't know what would be the easiest way to go about it.
I don't understand that too.
Is there a bug in my side or your side?
I have no idea, but clearly something has changed.
You can show attributes.
Yeah, maybe. Although I find it hard to believe we put attributes on interfaces.
So does component model depend on primitives or the other way?
Component model existed before we even had primitives. Primitives was added as part of the work for doing type descriptors, so it's brand new. So component model does not depend on primitives today.
And nor primitives depend on component.
I don't think so. I think they're kind of disjointed right
Okay, that's actually good. The names are a bit unfortunate, but
Can you see what else is in primitives? There's a bunch of interfaces.
Oh, sorry, I need to enter my credentials first because Visual Studio thinks I'm not having a license. If only I would work here. Of course, two-factor off for the win.
I feel a lot safer knowing you have to do that. That's good.
I know, right? Perfect. So, because the question that this came was dependency, so that's basically what we have.
So I guess component model primitives does depend on component model.
Yeah.
So it's not the actual lowest level.
Should we rename system component model to more primitive then? Or really primitive?
I wonder why the
Primitives.
dependency is there, by the way. That's why I was going to look at what's in the system component model primitives. I forgot what's in there. We look at it.
It is
Component model
it's
primitives?
just two interfaces, no?
I
What is it?
and you're saying we just created the primitives.
As in, like, it's still never ship stable.
Oh, maybe we should like do something with it.
Yeah, towards the end, I was going to talk about the naming also, so we can talk about
Okay.
Oh, so which of these have shipped stable?
System component model is the only one, system component model annotations with type converter primitives
type converter
have not. They haven't shipped stable. As far as I remember, I don't think it has. I can double check right this second, but.
What is stable? What do you mean?
It means we are bound by breaking changes. We cannot make them.
We only ship the pre-release
file.
version of the packages. Basically, we're allowed to make breaking changes if we want. We should try to avoid it if we can, but in general, like, we don't have any support policy on it.
Let me actually open up my beautiful platform.NET Core. So
Apparently, we did ship a stable version of type converter. Didn't realize that.
yeah, we did.
What did we ship? What did you say? Just like that. Oh, type converter we shipped?
Yes. So
Did it depend on
every one of these has been
primitives?
shipped at least one stable, so we can't do break.
Even the primitives?
Yes.
They would go together.
So all of them shipped literally as stable.
One version of stable.
Yeah, we shipped it apparently in UWP. And then the what was the other one? Primitives.
Primitives is there too. I got. It's got a
Yeah,
stable.
primitives there's nothing in it though. So what do we want to change, by the way?
No, if we hadn't shipped a stable, I was going to consider renaming the type converter the type descriptor for the component model.
Oh, I see.
And then
Yeah, that
potentially
should.
combining primitives in this other component model.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's unfortunate. The name is what it is. I think it's just something we have to live with now. All right, so I'm still confused what the change was here, so I give up. Let me just remove the edge. Well, let me actually leave the attributes in. It's probably helping. So means the only change in this contract is literally for type converter, which is basically your short-term plan. Like how do I get the long-term plan? Is that another Apex or is that in the other one?
Well, there's another reference assembly. I don't think there's an Apex set up for that, so we can swap out the assembly.
Yeah, where do I find that guy? Let me actually just
Charles can probably send it to you.
let me just what do I do now? This is the type converter. So let me just copy the guy. Say, is it in the component model diff, or is it? I don't have that, I guess, right?
So the other diff has it, but that's against the full framework.
Well, that's fine, but if it in the if it's in the Apex, that means there's the assembly in it too. So I can. So that would be type converter, I suppose.
Yeah, I just added everything to that reference assembly for now, just to make the diff.
And then I can just open that guy. And let me just swap the sides. And then I guess I just. Yeah. Yeah, that sounds about right. All right. So
I think on the
so this is now the diff between your medium term, which is what you originally sent me. I moved that to the left side, and I added the long term on the right hand side. So now we see the difference between what we would add between what we would do now versus long term.
the left is probably missing the object model contract and the runtime contract. We have a few types.
Yeah, I haven't added those. I just added the. So what do you want to add there? Do you roughly know?
Nothing. But
I-
just
I see.
they'll appear as additions now, incorrect.
Oh, I see. So this is literally everything the component model contains now, or like everything that was in
Everything
the.
that's not designer or like WinForms dependent.
Let's see. I see. So that's basically. So do you know that these things for like? Do you know that this is used somewhere, or did you just add it because it showed up?
Just added because it didn't have a dependency. So that's one of the main differences between the last diff and this one. Last one, we know that they're used, like we have use cases. This
Oh,
one is just wholesale. If we don't have a dependency that we can port.
I see. So basically, we took everything off type component model and just deleted everything that you knew had a dependency on WinForms, and that's the remainder.
Yeah.
Essentially. So
Or anything that was used to support this WinForm scenario, like designers, editors, binding.
makes sense. Yeah, that's quite a bit. 447.
Hence why we split it up.
Yeah. it would be great to have something in between, like basically type descriptor, but everything for type descriptors. Like for instance, some of the stuff here that I have no idea what it's being used for, like reference converter, I guess is something from types, but like, read-only attribute, nullable converter, I don't know whether any of them are actually used anywhere. So I don't know about this one here, the parenthesized property name attribute.
So those would be designer things. They're not tied to types directly, but I mean, some.
Yeah, there's likely that there are still some designer related stuff here that we did not catch.
Another one of the issues that we're looking at here is it seems a lot of things in this namespace have been used for unintended purposes. So it's unclear whether there's still a value to people who aren't actually using any UI functionality.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the question generally is, I agree with Christopher in principle that we should, not subset arbitrarily, but I would also avoid this being a complete dumping ground. We would just say a component model, like everything that isn't bad, we just stuff it in here, because then I think that may not be necessarily a smart thing.
Just to clarify my position, I think there were some types that you already added in the short term.
Yeah.
And they were simple, they didn't have any dependencies, but they were not filled in.
Yes.
Like the event descriptor. I would just do those. Yes. The other one, the longer term, I think we should discuss separately, and I agree with you.
Yeah.
Okay. So the step classes, fill those in, but ignore the.
Yeah.
I would say generally, if you already pull on a type, you fill in all the members.
Well, unless it pulls in, massive set of dependencies.
Yes.
Right.
If it's like almost free from dependency perspective, I would just add it.
You got this is purely based on the scan of the entire namespace, regardless of whether or not it was type descriptor based or anything.
Well, one of the things we found is that a lot of the types seem to be used in contexts that we don't expect, like the display name.
Yeah.
People want that,
Yeah.
so we didn't know where to draw the line.
No, that's fair. My question generally would be what was this thing we looked at? Event, right? Event descriptor. Here we go. Yeah, so the members on this one seem fine, right? They don't pull in any other additional thing that aren't already there.
All right.
I think we should probably make a pass on the types. If you do that, make sure that types that we should loop in, we also loop in. Like, for example, anything that ends in descriptor, provider, or converter is probably something that we should add at this point, like as a rule of thumb. Mm-hmm. But there's probably some other stuff like, along the lines of the display name attribute, which are generally attributes, which you should probably look at that and make a decision where we want to put those. And then for the remainder stuff, I don't know. Like, some of this strikes me just as miscellaneous stuff that somebody, it's a designer at some point, felt they needed it and then they added the type. Like the one I just saw was like IList source. It's probably some data binding stuff. I nested site, same thing.
Yeah, it's
I raised, I changed.
Unless this thing has an infrastructure that looks it up and just.
But besides that, it looks relatively clean. Warning exception is an awesome one. At some point I saw what was it? Message box exception class, which basically I think that's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
All right, I think that looks great. Then let's actually minimize that guy, and then let's look at this one here, I believe. Right, so this is basically the fold between, I guess, system and system and our component model things, right?
Yeah.
which means probably if we just look at this guy here, we essentially see all the, and that's basically the diff between long-term and desktop or short-term. Yes. Okay, so that's basically everything that would then remain after that.
We found each time we went through the list of things, there were more that we cut out, and so like there are some classes of things that we figured were probably not important. Like there's a whole license manager system that we cut that out, but yeah, definitely want input on what's important, what isn't.
So I suggest we look only at types that you already have first. Ignore that because that's not helping. And so these are all the types that you expose where you remove members.
Well, there's members that are on the desktop that aren't in the contract.
Yeah, so what did that mean? Like,
We didn't actually remove members, it's basically we didn't add them. They're just on desktop, we just didn't add them to the contract.
yeah, so we essentially removed them, right? Like in a sense. I mean, not adding or removing is a matter of perspective.
One of the questions that came up on the GitHub issue concerned some of the collections.
Yep.
And explicit versus implicit of the count property.
Yep.
Because these are all non-generic collections. Like they all implement iCollection. And he pointed, I can't remember who did it, but pointed out that on like regex, it had been done a certain way so that it would allow for generic versions to be added later. So if we wanted to follow the same pattern, if we would want to change like implicit versus explicit of certain properties or methods that implement iCollection. So for instance, if you scroll down, I saw one, attribute collection. The count property there is explicitly defined. And then the copy to, I think, was the one that was pointed out that in regex, that one had been switched to be explicit.
But I don't understand why we even do this here, because I mean, like they better return the same number anyway, right? So like, why do we even have?
Like, is there a reason that we would need it? Oh, it looks like we're not even bringing it over.
You don't
Oh, so you must have changed it after the comment?
Yeah, I changed a few of those,
okay.
but overall, it's a good question of what we should do with that. Just remove the explicit implementations.
Yeah, that's not going to hurt anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still going to be compatible.
Yeah, I mean, I would generally say that, you know, regardless of these things, which would just work anyway, I would not design these contracts so we can implement non-generic collections, because I really don't see us doing that.
Okay.
Like, I mean, we basically provide this entire thing for compat, and as soon as you try to implement generic collections, that's not necessarily super trivial, because they have subtly different behavior. Like, for example, for dictionaries, like what happens when it doesn't exist, and it doesn't strike me as one of those things that people will use so much that we would even invest in that.
Okay.
I would just leave it as is.
So leave it as is, but get rid of any of the explicit properties.
Well, like if you have like matching APIs, then yes. I mean, like if you for example, if you implement something that takes object and you have an alternative overload that takes type thing, yeah, by all means implement the object one explicitly. But I would generally say match whatever desktop did. I mean, if desktop didn't do it, then I wouldn't do it either.
So interestingly, get enumerator is one of those cases you just mentioned. It's a untyped API. Should it be implemented implicitly?
Well, I think in this case, given that it doesn't implement generics and it never will, like I don't see why we wouldn't expose it publicly. And also, like looking at the diff here, it seems desktop did. So,
the same.
What did it?
The getting numerator, both implicit and explicit, are
There's no
doing
reason
the
to
same
have
thing.
fixation.
It's not, the one's not typed.
Oh no, I get it. So basically, yeah,
It's the same thing with count.
so we removed it, which means desktop did the odd thing here. Yes. Yeah, I don't know what they did there. That seems really weird.
Okay.
That was probably from day one when nobody knew quite what it did. But so, any reason why we removed this constructor here?
That one may be marked obsolete.
And some of these may have been done before we did it. So this may have been a decision that was made before. Like, there's the component model dot async something assembly, and so that may be in there.
The event-based async.
Yeah, event-based async.
Yeah, that constructor is actually.
Yeah, let me actually remove this because it makes way too much noise. Yeah, so that makes sense.
Can you remove the finalizer?
Can we remove a finalizer?
Destructor.
Technically, I mean, it's a virtual method, right? So you never really remove it, but I mean, better have same semantics. So I would say if you don't have to do anything, then yes, it's fine to remove it. But I mean, usually that these things did something.
So it was removed.
So this one, I think, makes sense.
It wasn't removed, it was just grayed out.
What does it
Which just means it's coming from the base.
That's an old change. That's the way it is
Yeah,
now in
yeah.
event-based async.
No, I think adding generally is fine. I mean, I wouldn't go overboard. But that is odd.
Component collection doesn't have any base.
Component collection exists now as a stub.
Yeah, so we're deciding not to do anything with component, we're not bringing component still as it completely stubbed.
Mostly
Don't
just
they
doesn't
have
exist.
iComponent?
We do have
Yeah,
iComponent on one,
But
yeah.
not
The base
component.
component doesn't.
True.
The only reason component collection exists is because it's on one of the interfaces, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Because one of the type converters was converting component collection to a string or something like that.
No, I was just wondering, like, if we had to type iComponent, I don't see a reason why we would stop this guy out, right? Because it doesn't do anything except maintaining a list of iComponents. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't really add any dependencies, but who cares? This one seems more problematic. Is this WinForms dependency, or why?
No, just because it's getting an editor, and we're not trying to enable any editor scenarios.
Yeah, it seems like it's tightly covered.
All
It
editors.
depends on like a UI type something like some. It's not generic. Like there's no generics with it, but from the documentation, it looks like it's requires any editor needs to derive from this UI editor type
It
something.
needs to derive from that specific type from system design assembly
Yeah.
because other cases in system design assembly are instantiating that string, that type that is represented in
Yeah.
the string as that UI type.
Yeah.
So what will, if you implement something your own, right, the cast will fail eventually.
Yeah. So like
There's no way to
no
actually.
reason.
there's no like actual dependency like in the reference assembly or anything, but it won't be able to be used.
I mean, the only thing I would say is that if we were to add it long term, I mean, the question, I mean, we can still add it portably, right? We could still make this implementation return basically null, right?
Well, that's what it does, basically, it delegates always to its parent, and it doesn't have a parent, it returns null, that's the
Yeah.
implementation.
So we could implement it, but it would not give you useful results. But then if you are running on desktop, it would do the right thing. Right? So if there's a scenario where we want to make that work, we could, but there's no way to implement it currently, then I also don't see a massive reason we need to add it now, because it's a virtual method, we can add it later, it's fine. Okay.
That no longer exists on the attribute contract.
So
Is
that,
it on attribute before?
It was on attribute in the full framework, but it's not in the core contracts. You can't override it. In the catalog, it's labeled as not doing what I think it does. So.
yeah, that sounds like a comment I would write.
This returns
Same.
With this default attribute.
equals object, basically. but I guess they override it to do something special.
Oh, I see. Great. Is default attribute, I guess that's the
It's
same
the
thing.
same thing. Yeah. Also, it doesn't do it. I think it does.
These are the best APIs to have. Do work event arcs.
That one already exists.
Interesting, we just changed the base type. Okay.
That's in the background worker stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, event-based async.
Same thing, same thing, same thing, same thing. Same. Yeah, we talked about, oh, that's more problematic.
Yes, that's not possible. That's the reason why we added it back.
Oh,
That one we can't do.
right.
What?
Interfaces can't add or remove
They
methods.
gotta be, they're fixed.
So maybe we should just add the get editor.
Turn them off for now,
Yeah.
yeah.
But nice try.
That's how we do these, right?
I really don't like this.
Actually, in fact, you can probably implement it exactly the way it is on desktop. Just
Yeah, probably.
if the parent exists, call get editor on the parent. If it doesn't, return no. That's how it's implemented.
Okay, yeah.
So somebody that does provide a
Because
custom
probably
type
most of the things that actually use, like call get editor and get something, we're not implementing that.
right. So if somebody wrote their own type descriptor that did have something useful in the editor, they could.
It just won't be used anywhere.
UI for it.
Well, the name seems to imply an editor, but people can plumb whatever they want in there. Is basically give it
As long as
primary
there's no
sub
check.
object.
Yeah, as long as there's no check for the type, like I could see someone using this for like registering some programmatic editor that would modify the value.
Mm, yeah.
It's fine, seems fine. Yeah, that seems fine. Why did we remove that guy?
Designer serialization visibility.
Because that's type design.
Designer.
Isn't it just an enum?
Probably.
Designer.
You've got it hidden. Sure.
Yeah, I guess that's the point. Yes, I think when I remember correctly, I think this is essentially controlling whether it's
Yeah.
bolded or not, right, in property grid, which basically controls whether, like, basically it shows if it's changed or not
Invisible
changed, right?
content.
It's how it's serialized in that designer.cs file. It's either
Invisible content is letting them look through story values.
Okay, then I don't know what it is. So basically it controls whether it's
all properties of this class are serialized, really, or only that class.
let's see.
So
Is there
it's
any
got-
harm to not expose it though? I don't know that there
it's
is.
again nobody's using it. So
Well, we don't know, but I would say that's true about a lot of these things.
That's true.
I mean, it goes back to the principle we said earlier, right? If you already expose other things like should serialize value, for instance, it seems like already implying that there's some serialization. You might as well just add the property and be done with it.
Yeah,
If it's just
Yeah.
It doesn't add any crazy dependencies, and it's just.
Yeah, if that's just an enum.
If somebody happens to be using it and they start using it, why did you not exclude this arbitrarily?
and the answer is because we didn't know what it did, so we decided not to. As it turns out, it's not a good bar.
yeah, so in designer it's sort of it's sort of guidance whether content goes into regex file or into designer.
Yeah, but I can see that being useful for people using this stuff. They
Yeah.
might actually use it for serialization of their own properties here.
Yeah.
possibly.
Or just for people that want to have desktop compat, right? Clear, yep, that all looks fine. Oh yeah, that one. Remove from attribute, I think. Same here.
Are we going to be breaking more of these attributes, the semantics of some of these attributes, by removing these
So when I looked at some of the implementations, are you talking about by removing some of those methods?
Type ID and the match in various places.
I know that as default attribute, it's using a heuristic to find something. So like it doesn't seem to break anything. It just breaks like the heuristic. So you just can't have that.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the whole point of having these attributes applied is somebody's going to read them and make some sense of them, and we're going to be breaking that code.
But by removing match and type ID, we may break scenarios.
Yeah, because now you're not going to be equivalent in certain ways. Yes.
It's possible. The parts I've looked at, it doesn't look like it's critical, but I haven't like tested it or anything.
I mean, if a bug shows up, I mean, one way we could fix this potentially is by adding another type in between, right, that provides these as abstract bases.
Some of them are easily replaced. Type ID is not that useful. Match can be kind of replaced with equals if you kind of do the squint.
What do they actually do? Like they're just
match on the base when basically it goes down and calls equals. So you can in theory override equals and kind of get a similar behavior if you wanted to.
Oh, it's you're asking what these overrides essentially do.
Yeah, and type ID is basically just gives you a unique ID for that, so you can kind of fake that on your own sort of as well if you wanted to. Yeah. It doesn't need to come.
The is default one is the reason we didn't include that, because that you can override that to define, like if it's the default, like if you instantiate the attribute with parameters or not. And so I don't know like how why someone would use it, but there is some places in here where it does.
Yeah, right now the base type of descriptor is false all the time.
Okay.
So you have to. I guess the only thing you're losing is sort of an abstraction. And in theory, you could essentially add another interface that has the members you want. If you want to use attributes, they'll kind of all look the same, and you're kind of working through a set of these attributes possibly.
Well, we can keep that in mind as we implement them.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things where customer feedback will help us.
Yeah.
All right, type descriptor. Here's a bunch of stuff that we subset. ICOM native description handler. That's already inspiring.
Oh, right. So if you have get editor and add editor table, right.
Yeah, probably just any of the editor stuff.
So this is I would say that it doesn't strike me as a bad dependency, because I mean, like they all exchange essentially based on system.type, right? And so if the higher level can still have UI and like register these editors, right? I mean, like from a layering standpoint, that's not even.
Okay.
Well, you see that thing right there is called hash table. We'll automatically pull in non-generic.
Yeah, that's one of the.
For legacy contracts? Yeah, I mean, no, we do actually. I think pretty sure. Like implementation will most certainly derive from that.
Mine.
Like, I mean, all these collection types probably derive from these fuckers already, right? No, they don't actually.
Some of them don't.
Well, it's amazing actually.
There's a lot of hash table usage within the.
It's only collection based. I mean, we got one anyways. Yeah.
Maybe that's why you didn't bring that in.
Yeah, I would say though, as a principle, like I mean, given this is a compat thing, I'm fine with adding a dependency on non-generic collections. I mean,
I'm not hung up on it either.
That seems not outrageous. So we should probably add editor table back.
Okay.
Just to have the same behavior.
Yeah, the implementation doesn't currently reference non-generic collections.
And do you know what this com stuff does? Like the ICOM thingy at the top? Like what are they?
Oh. I think they are just declarations on the in system DLL, but they're used actually in system Windows forms. I don't remember what this one is doing, but the actual work with COM types is done in a different DLL.
Yeah, so this is how that interface looks like, by the way. So it seems to me it looks like type descriptor exposed through COM. Which seems rather odd.
The interface.
Oh, no, it's a wrapper around the COM object. So if you are adding ActiveX control to a designer,
Oh, I see.
That's how you wrap it up into type descriptor, and that type descriptor is presenting that ActiveX to designer. But actual work is done not in system DLL. I don't know why type is declared here.
So if you would add these things, like, do they do anything, or is it literally just for some higher layer to get the data?
It does pull in on.
So the ICOM native descriptor handler on MSDN listed as obsolete. The com object type is the preferred method.
But even with com object type, it's actually registering to a custom type descriptor provider. It's not even implemented in system DLL. That points at WinForms DLL to pull it out of WinForms. So it's coupled to WinForms tightly right now. So I would just axe it for now because of the WinForms piece.
But the implementation, we could just return null in the in the core implementation, just return null for that. So similar with the editor, just if we wanted to just keep it for completeness.
Yeah, the com object type would return null for the type. That seems a little bit.
I don't know.
We have to return something, I suppose, right?
If we expose it.
Yeah, I would say that we can start with.
Yeah, it says the type of the com object represented by this component. It returns that or null for non-com objects.
Currently, the implementation always returns an instance of this type thing that has a provider that points to WinForms in the desktop.
Okay.
It never returns null.
Well, maybe that provider goes through and does this.
But the provider is implemented currently in WinForms. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, and I would say then let's not expose it for now, because it seems implementing is a bit more involved. And if the scenario is literally for ActiveX controls, it's like, well, who's doing it realistically today? ICOM native. So what about create designer? What does iDesigner?
MSDN says provides a basic framework for building a custom designer.
I got
Did we expose this already in the component model primitives? If the interface is not exposed, we probably should just.
Component.
No, it's in the designer namespace or design namespace. So we just that's I think why we did
Yeah. I think it's finally done.
Yeah, I think that's more. It's one of those things that are super hard to layer after the fact, though. Yeah, I mean,
I don't think we need to bring in the whole design namespace yet.
I agree. Well, this one also strikes me as bad layering, because the thing is that this one actually has to do work, right? This one actually registers stuff, so higher level can register at the lower level, but this basically forces the lower level to do something, right? So like they would have to, yeah, it's not. Type descriptor create designer. Yeah, we should probably expose those guys. I suppose they're still in TypeDescriptor. Yes, they are. Expose type. Get editor. Yeah, I mean that looks good. I mean that was the only members to be removed.
I'd like to take a closer look at the attributes that are in this namespace beforehand.
So that means that's find it again. Yeah. Our naming back then was awesome.
ambient value attribute.
Yeah, so of course some of these are removed because I could not figure out what they did.
That means the ones that you included, you're going to be able to tell me what they do then?
Maybe guess MSDNSS provides ambient value.
Yeah, no idea.
Oh, that's actually helpful. It says specifies the value to pass to a property to cause the property to get its value from another source. This is known as ambience. And by the way, this class cannot be inherited, in case you wonder.
That's a pretty typical design for attribute stuff.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's when you set font on the form, and font is propagated for all.
So I guess the idea would be that you provide, like, how, like, I guess this is the, I don't understand how that works though. I mean, the only thing I can provide here are primitive types, right? Or primitive values. How do I actually use that?
Object, there is an object.
Well, but because it's a literal, like you have to, like you can only really use these guys here or this guy here. So, but what do I provide here? Like the name of the font, and then I say type is type of font.
I remember that internally we have certain collection with ambient properties, and if property is not defined explicitly on upper in the tree, we traverse the tree down to the container and
I see.
ambient properties there.
It's very similar to what the default value attribute does in some notation. It's just a matter of who's reading.
I guess this mechanism provides more like performance optimizations than the default value.
I mean, it seems that one thing we should probably do is I would leave those guys out for now, but then when you actually look at the code, let's say there's like 10 lines of code that handle ambient value attribute, instead of ripping out the code, add the attribute. But I think the reverse would be more problematic, meaning, we had the attribute which is 10 lines of code, but now we have to include thousands of lines of code that deal with that, which may not be worth it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good litmus test. Basically, in the code of the reporting, make sure any of the attributes that are getting referenced, that those are good candidates to bring in.
Because I don't know, like it seems like for those attributes, it's more like a, if it's easy to support it, support it. If not, then it's not.
Yeah. Most of them are really simple.
So you wanted to look at all the attributes you said, right? So let's just do that. Okay, so right.
That'd be easier to look on the left side.
Yeah, except that I can search on the left-hand side. All right, attribute collection we talked about, obviously. Attribute provider attribute we talked about.
Did we? Actually, I don't know what that was. That was one of the ones I was curious about what it's doing.
Attribute provider?
Yeah.
I guess you register the provider for the attributes.
When there's no attribute provider, what do you register?
Well, I think it's the same thing. I think the iCustom type descriptor I think has a method called get custom attributes or something.
So you register a type descriptor or iCustom?
I guess. Actually, that's not the one.
So type
No,
type descriptor reads not only providers that you added to the static collection, but it also reads attributes on all types.
I see, so that they can redirect to another type of how they're going to get to that.
There are multiple ways to extend that static table.
Okay.
Yeah, the naming is pretty terrible, but the feature set is pretty cool. I remember that I used it and I kind of liked it.
Okay.
Do you need multiple ways of
There's not enough things. There's never enough extensibility hooks. Unless you want to build a B tool, then you realize you have too many.
The browsable editable, the browsable attribute. I know we already exposed it, but what's red there? I thought we exposed
There are two. There's editor browsable, which we do have, and browsable, which we do not.
Yeah, browsable just control property grid. Sorry.
Editor is IntelliSense and browsable is property grid.
Yep.
Yeah. All right.
I would say let's just edit. There's not a reason not to edit. And like it is kind of nice. Like when you do type descriptor and you want to register and you want to basically have designable types for desktop, like it's just data, right? There's not a reason not to have it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm cool with that. You use static read-only fields for its values instead of else, but
Well, I think those are actually not that useful. I mean, I think they're just used in code. I think, I mean, you literally apply the attribute and you pass in this guy here, right? So those guys are stupid, but category attribute, that same thing. It's property grid stuff, right? Not a reason not to have it.
yeah, it looks kind of horrible. But yeah, I can see people using the static ones are the ones that
We're ending up with the whole thing.
I wouldn't expose the. I don't think I'd expose the static ones.
Yeah.
The static action keys, Windows style. You think that's useful?
Mm.
Well, I mean,
Not cost anything.
literally, they all they do is they probably say action equals new category attribute action, right? I mean, I think it's all they do.
These are known categories.
Yeah. I don't know how you use them though. Like how, like when I put the attribute on my type, there's no way I can reference these guys.
They have to be used by code on their side. Yes, you can't use it directly unless you're doing it dynamically.
Exactly, but that
But you
for
might be
attributes, I
doing
mean, yeah, but for attributes, it's like if the primary use case is an attribute, right?
No, but in this world though, you are creating attributes, putting a bunch of stuff around based on other metadata.
Yeah, I guess.
But I do think category attribute is a good enough name, and it's just a blind string. Although, yeah, that seems like generally useful for people to do that.
I mean, again, I would like to what we said earlier. I'm fine with starting having action, appearance, and behavior, blah blah blah. Those things not in. But if your code uses it, like just add it and move on. If it's not used, then I don't. I honestly don't know how you would use them, unless you actually construct things by hand, which seems a lot of work.
Providers you just possibly.
Yeah, but you have to apply this to every single freaking property you return. Like, how do you know which property you put?
Yeah, you want
That's
to
exactly
categorize
what Rogers does. Is gives you a set of attributes back that they want.
No, I get it. All I'm saying is that if you think about it, right? Like you basically construct properties, descriptors for a given object, right? Then you decide based on some attribute, which I'm pretty sure is category attribute, whether you put something in foo or blah.
You're assuming that it's actually on the type. I don't think it's on the type. It's coming from some other serialized data stream that says I am an action category, and so they return this instance.
I guess. All right, fine. Think about.
So yes on including the static, or
I would go with like what we said earlier. I would start with let's not add them, and then when you see them, add them. I don't know.
we can always add them in the implementation for now and just not expose them to reference.
The best they're used for caching. I wouldn't.
I think they're used only in designer, in property grid.
Okay. Well,
That's a good point.
we'll see how it's used in the code.
Yeah, I can see that.
Probably the same for the other one. Browser, the same comment.
Yeah.
These attributes should probably also go into the primitives layer. At least these couple we went through. The attribute provider stays in type descriptor because that's completely
Right.
bound.
But the actual attributes themselves, should we just plan on putting them all in the primitives?
Not all of them. Like the attribute provider attribute, I think that's bound to type converter.
Got it.
Right. So like category, display name, and browsable. Those are more general like component level things that aren't really defined around type converter. So they kind of make more sense to go from these.
Okay.
Seems reasonable. What do we have? Category we just talked about.
Yeah.
Because I assume we didn't want to have all of the bindings.
Yeah, I don't know that we would care to have the data binding stuff.
Yeah, especially the uniform data binding is not that useful. It doesn't do that much.
I just skipped that.
Component resource manager, data object attribute.
Used for binding.
Just some binding stuff.
Yeah, I think so. Data object field attribute, I guess it's also binding.
But field attribute we added. Data
Yeah.
object, field attribute, data object method.
Yeah, because it wasn't clear to me from reading the docs whether it's applicable to non-binding. So
Already have a guess. We exposed that because other things we did, like EF.
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't assume that yet. I think we should exclude them unless we actually do see them being used by the code somewhere.
I thought we already exposed it.
I suspect we didn't expose it yet. That's just been.
Oh, because it's the difference between what we plan and what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would
Never mind.
not expose the data binding
We
attribute.
have the data something attribute.
I mean, I can quickly verify that. What is it called? Data object field attribute. Here we go. We haven't exposed it yet. Actually, this guy over here. Over here. What else do we have?
To make a note about the data attributes. I'm not exposing.
And this one we already decided not to, which makes sense. Designer.
Hold on. We'll just go through the default attribute and the property. Just want to make sure those are new. Those should be. Those ones seem to be make sense for type descriptor contract. Event default property. I think they're tied to specifically to.
It is used in serialization code and it is used to reset default value in property grid. I don't remember if it's used in type. It's exposed in type descriptor, right? Externally.
But it seems like it's bound to some sort of type description stuff.
What does default property do? I mean, at event I get because that's what happens when you double click the
It
guys.
tells it's the same. It's the default highlighted property in property grid. So you select text box and your text value is highlighted and selected.
I see. Makes sense. So that means default value.
Not default value.
Default value
Default
is
event
default.
default property.
Sorry, default event property attribute should be in converter. Default value, default description. Description we already have, I'm pretty sure.
Did we? I think it's new, but because I think that one was missing along with display name when I was looking at some of the reasons.
Oh, that makes
was
sense.
Another candidate to go up for into permanence.
That makes sense. So, description attribute. I got your comment on that one because everything that's not tied to it, we said should go down, which is this one as well. Designer attribute, I think is fine. We said we don't want to have designers, right? So that makes sense. Designer
But
category.
it's about the same as default property and default.
Default event.
I don't see why you are keeping a default event, default property, but not designer, and you're keeping editor, right?
Well, the way I would see this is the default things are just metadata on your types, right? Which basically, if the type itself is designed at design time, it has certain behavior, right? Versus designer attribute is like you literally have to put in a name of the designer that you have to instantiate, right? Which is you have to provide the implementation for it. And that's something
So
we can't
this
do.
is more literal and default could
I
be
can,
used
but
for
I can
something
see,
else.
I can definitely see default property being used for things like, what am I getting for my toString value for something else outside of editor based on these other things when I'm in my object model. These are.
But someone has to provide that default value, right?
Yeah,
And that
but-
someone is designer, and we don't have designer.
No, no, but, yeah, the designer is one such place. You can imagine, like, I can imagine a scenario where I put a default property on one of my 10 properties, and that's the guy that gets toStringed or serialized or something because I decided to mark it as a default kind of thing. I don't know. There's something along those lines. I see it more applicably than just designer. If designer does use it, I agree.
Yeah, designers, I mean, it's very specific, right? I don't know how else you would use it. I mean, versus the other one, they have it's more general purpose metadata. Yeah, we talked about this one. Talked about
We're at this, that.
the attribute we didn't talk about. We talked about this guy for that's the property that we had on TypeDescriptor that you
Right.
could set. So this one needs to be exposed anyway, but what about this one here? That seems
That's
to
where
be
you put this
sensible.
property. That's
If we're gonna expose that.
Yeah, might as well.
Yeah, that's how you get to.
Yeah, I think we should expose that. There's no way I type this correctly. Designer. No, let me just copy and paste this. Design only attribute. I have no idea what that means.
I'm not sure.
Design time visible. My naming was really not that great back then.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time seeing exactly what they would use outside of the design script.
There's at least 6 or 7 attributes that literally just control visibility of stuff. Like, I don't understand. Display name, we talked about that one. Editor browser, we already had.
What's the missing API?
Editor probably like constructor.
Yeah.
Yeah, no expand to object. I'm binding this view. I cancel, add new, change tracking, com blah, custom blah, 30 cents builder.
Inheritance attribute. What is that? Inheritance attribute.
Where did you see that?
In the I section of inheritance. Yeah. What are we inheriting?
See, maybe MSN has something useful to say here.
but name is generic.
It is, that's why I'm trying to understand what it's used.
Indicator of the component associated with this attribute has been inherited from the base class. Yeah, if only we had another way to indicate that. I have no idea what that even means.
I'm not sure. But I'm not opposed to leaving it.
Oh, I know what it means. So in WinForms, you can have an inherited form, which means you have a base form, and then you basically create an inherited form, and the designer will render the UI controls showing you that they were inherited from the base, but then you can override the settings. So for example, you can inherit from this guy, so you have basically 2 login screens, but one has, maybe username disabled or something like that. So you can basically do visual inheritance. That's essentially what it boils down to. It's the same inheritance. I don't know why they have the attributes. I think that's probably just a way to communicate data, because you have the little indicators right in the designer that shows that it's inherited from the base. I think without a designer it makes no sense to have.
Yeah,
Because that's not something you would statically put on types, I'm pretty sure. That's probably something to do that dynamically. Installer type attribute.
the iNested site, did we just add that where it was exposed somewhere else?
I'm pretty sure that's in primitives. I think it was one of the things you
I
couldn't
know we
remove.
added iSite because
iNested site is new. It's not in the existing contracts.
It's not interesting.
Was it coming in from some other member? Did it get pulled in for some reason?
No, I think that's just the maximum that they could do, right?
I mean,
Well, that's basically the diff between the maximum we could do.
I know. I'm just trying to question whether or not that should be added.
I don't think it should be.
Yeah, and that's the type of site should probably not be added.
Unless it's required by
Unless
some.
it's exposed in some API we can't pull in.
Yeah, all the inheritance stuff we probably shouldn't add either. The installer stuff makes sense not to have. This one I'm pretty sure we already have probably. And that we don't have. We already have those guys. I raise item change events.
I believe so, yeah.
There was some of the change tracking in the original component, but I don't think that one is in one.
Let me actually go inheritance. No, we don't today.
So if we don't have it, we can just not include the change tracking?
The chain checking already is exposed.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Funny enough, it's currently exposed by system component model. I don't know. I don't see harm exposing, but I also don't think it adds anything. I mean,
It's implemented by like one thing right now, it's a binding list. It's only about data binding.
all right, then I go with it's not. Rise item change event arcs. Yeah, just move on. Initialization stuff before we.
Eyesight, what about eyesight?
It's already there.
Oh.
That one happens to be on another interface, which we've had to keep bring it along, drag it along, but we don't really want to bring any more than we have to for it.
TypeDescriptor iType list. Did we already expose iType list?
I don't remember.
I think this one was used in one of the converters.
Would look like it. I mean, we don't expose it yet, but it seems like it's tied to property descriptors and stuff. So, I would think license should we not have? That makes no sense.
So license are skipped because of open source? Or
It's not part of the type converter and type descriptor stuff. It's
Yeah.
just
The license is for, like, if you create your own component, it's a mechanism so that you can provide, like, a license key or
Yeah.
something to enable it.
So why are you skipping?
Huh?
Why are you skipping it?
Well, I would say that if you
Doesn't
would
belong to
expose it,
logic?
I would make it a separate
Yeah.
component.
It probably could just be pulled out as a separate, like, component model license or something.
I mean, the bigger question is, in order for that scenario to work at all, it requires so much infrastructure that we don't have today. So, for instance, like in the build process, somebody has to find these ligx files, like take the type names, resolve the type names against something, which today I think happens against the GAC, right? And then activate some component, call it into it, get some key back, embed a resource, which we don't have in the open source build, right? I mean, I don't think the cross-plat MS build support currently has license support. And
I was wondering if
even the
licensing will
activation,
be.
sorry, I don't know how that would work.
I was wondering if licensing is just not applicable completely to OSS.
Well, I would argue that it should be. I mean, I think, I don't know, like, in order to, I think there's the bigger question of like, what does licensing look like in that world? I mean, there was another idea to basically have, make licensing part of NuGet acquisition or something where you can, basically have to pay somebody to get access to their feed, for instance. And like, I think there's better ways to do it because this one is a bit of a pain in the butt. But I think it has to do with open source. It's more like for ecosystem on top. Okay, that's data binding, which we don't want. List changed event arcs. Isn't that data binding essentially?
Maybe.
Sounds like.
I mean, it's,
I mean, I'm pretty sure we don't expose it yet. Yep, not exposed yet, but it looks surely like.
non-binding list.
Yeah, okay. Let's not expose, what's this called? List changed.
I guess we should verify that we didn't expose binding list above it too.
We did not.
Okay. Yeah. This looks like it's only in support binding list.
This sort, I guess, is the same thing, right, as list change. I mean, it strikes me as very similar. I'm going with not exposing it to prove otherwise. Let's not expose list sort star.
Yeah, that's right.
Localizable is an interesting one. Did we already expose that?
I don't believe we did, but it does seem like it's reasonable to put it through.
That one should probably really be going to primitives,
Yeah.
right? Because that one, what's this happen? No, close it. Don't want that for sure. What about master by value component was? We should add that, I think.
There are no resources in core effects.
Resources. I mean, we should.
Exactly. Or how do you do
We have resource
localization? How do you do localization?
Resource manager.
Yeah, same way. I mean, there's another proposal from ASP.NET to do certain things, but in the end, I mean, it's just, how you indicate it versus how you actually retrieve it. I don't think this does anything, does it?
This marks something as localizable.
Yeah, that seems fine. So it's not like our SR attribute, right, which actually does the lookup.
It's for serializer to decide where to put that property in regex or in localize regex.
I see. So that's the whole, you enable localization for your form, and then when you change strings, whether they go in the regex or whether they go in the standard neutral.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So without resource manager, it wouldn't make sense. But if you have resource manager, it's fine.
The attribute itself could be useful, even just marking.
Yeah.
I could see people using that.
Like lookup, must, okay, that's all fine. Member descriptor. Obviously, we have merge property attribute. I guess it's part of the core.
Oh, this one is for property browser to display properties for multiple controls. You select all your buttons and you set size once in properties browser. So
that seems fine. Multi-line string, nested container, notify parent property attribute. It seems fine, I suppose. Nullable parenthesis working attribute. Yeah, what about this guy here? That seems like data binding related. I can't help it.
I think this is again specific for property grid to so some properties are in parentheses because they are not serialized and they're only for design type for this.
Oh, I see what you're saying. They show up at the top essentially like things like a name, for instance, right?
Yeah, something that is not real.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I see you're on board with that, I suppose.
I'm okay with it. I mean,
You didn't listen, so you're fine.
This is not a generic enough name to be general purpose attribute.
Which one? This one?
Parenthesize the property.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is to me, this is the same as like category attribute in the sense that if you, I mean, category is broadly applicable outside of the designer surface, it's true. But this one, again, like if you design a type that you want to design by desktop, it's nice if you can just add the freaking thing and then have it just light up.
Oh, so you are supporting scenarios where the same type is designed on desktop.
Yes,
And
definitely. As much as we can, where these are libraries that can run on both sides.
Yeah, unless there's bad layering, I think there's no reason to remove functionality that would prevent that scenario from working, because that seems...
Because you'll be able to compile against the reference contract for this,
Yes,
and just it'll type forward to system on desktop.
yes. Which means every feature we remove is just, for those kind of people, arbitrary, right?
So that's why you want to keep as much as possible.
Yep.
What is that notified parent property attribute?
Yeah, that one, I believe, controls essentially what happens when you have, nested things. Let's just ask MSDN.
Good deduction.
I know.
About serialization again.
Pretty sure what I just said is the official MS technology too.
Probably not far from it.
The way they describe it. God, what's with the internet today? Every time I open MSDN text server,
I just noticed that too. Yeah, pretty much.
this will really help you.
Pretty much what you just said.
Indicates that the parent property is modified when the value of the property that this attribute is applied to is modified.
Which parent property?
I have no idea.
I don't even know. That's fine.
I'm pretty confident it's the same as the parenthesized property name thingy. It's like if you actually have something that designs on desktop, it probably is useful to have, and it doesn't hurt probably to have it.
The other thing I have to call out there is that we had all those read-only properties on that thing too. It looks like that's a general pattern throughout this whole namespace.
Which one? The read-only properties?
Public static.
By parent property attribute. And that guy. There's a bunch of read-only static properties to
Yes.
default values, which in a lot of other places we were saying don't expose. So it looks like there's a general pattern that we should make a decision about. I don't know when we'd use them, so I can't make a call.
Can you search whether they're being used and what?
Let's see if I can find that.
Because I mean that will be an interesting thing to double check. I think what you said earlier, I think makes more sense. I think it's all about caching. I want to avoid that they all construct these attributes, right? Because they're data driven, and it makes sense to just use the same instance.
I'm looking at category attributes.
You really like your monitor dark, don't you?
I do. And orange.
What does it do? Like
It's easier in my eyes to stare at for hour after hour, which is...
But the contrast is weaker, right?
Yeah, it can be a problem. So sometimes you have to adjust colors. Like blue is hard to read, so...
Oh.
For the category attribute, the only one I found any uses of were the default property.
Yeah, same with the notified parent property.
So at some point, someone went and just blindly applied it to all attributes.
It looks like it.
There's something in WinForms that uses some of them as well.
In that case, I'm going with let's not expose them, which I already said earlier.
I mean, the worst case is people, if they're using for caching, people can cache them themselves.
Yeah. Well, unless somebody relies on reference quality.
But if we're going back to our other principle, it seems pretty arbitrary to remove them. They're not really hurting anything.
Well, that's what I said earlier. You push back. I'm fine with it. Given that they literally cost nothing. I
mean, I don't have a strong opinion about adding.
Given that this is not a space we understand well, that may be the better
It
decision.
seems like some of them are properties, some are fields. Right?
Yes, I've noticed that in a couple of things. So.
Let's go with that was .NET V1. Nobody really knew what they were doing.
Okay, so we'll just go with whatever was there.
Well, you need to be binary compatible.
Oh, okay.
So you
Yep.
can't change anything.
Okay. Yeah, good point.
So if you do want to have your classes designable on desktop, you might want to keep this.
Keep those properties.
Why?
Well, part of the reason why, like for the default one in particular, is that they do a quality checks for it, and if that doesn't exist, they won't be able to use the quality
They
checks in some cases.
So are we talking about these guys here now?
Yeah.
So we are
Oh, I see. Yeah, that
designers
makes sense.
reading these things. Designers searching for these attributes, for these constant
In
attributes.
some cases, yes.
I see.
Yeah. So let's just expose them as much as we might not like them. Doesn't really occur to me.
I found, there are multiple.
I found usage in Windows Forms stuff. Okay, we'll just default to including them.
All right. Noted. Password property text attribute. That seems
Pretty
incredibly
specific
specific.
to text boxes.
Yep.
Progress change that. These are not. These are new. Those arcs.
Progress change.
Did we actually expose them already?
I think one of those is already exposed.
I think it's from the background worker, is it not?
Some of them might be from backup.
Where's this thing called? Property. Where are we?
The background would be just progress change to the arcs.
I've already exposed it, by the way.
Yeah.
Same with all the other property changed event arcs, by the way. All right.
But we did the properties as well.
Yep. Changed and changing both exposed now.
That's fine.
Property descriptor, obviously. Property tab scope. Tab attribute.
Seems pretty specific to the tab control.
Oh, I think that's for the, you can add more tabs to property grid, I believe.
Seems like this maybe should be in the design interface.
Yeah, that one doesn't strike me as something you would need. Which seems fine. It's already excluded. That seems fine to have, because I think that's part of the sensibility. Read-only attribute seems fine. Recommended as configurable attribute.
It's obsolete.
Okay, good.
Naming is awesome. Reference converter. Yeah, I guess it makes sense. Refresh event arcs. That seems really odd. What is that?
Refresh event is event you raise on type descriptor.
Oh, there's a refreshed event, apparently.
Not event, it's a method.
Remember?
Yeah, there's a refresh method on TypeDescriptor.
Right.
All it causes this trigger event. I'm trying to find out what it
Occurs when the cache for a component is cleared.
There's a static event on TypeDescriptor. Did we expose that? Called refresh.
Think so. Type descriptor?
You've exposed all of the
On
stuff.
TypeDescriptor, there's a static event called refreshed.
See, and that's the event arcs for it.
Yes. Yeah. Where's the event?
Oh, sorry, no, actually, yeah, there were more events.
And
There you go.
so that's where it's coming from.
I see, that makes sense. So then we should expose it.
Yeah. That's the, all three of those.
Refresh. Properties.
Fresh properties, that's connected to those guys as well.
I think this is property grid related, but
All default repaint. Yes, no, file not found. All right. Run installer, I think is fine. Run worker completed event arcs. That's already part of the background worker, I guess. That's fine. Settings bindable. Make sure that's data binding. So we don't need that. Syntax check.
Syntax check, according to MSDN, is only used for internal infrastructure support.
Check machine name. Check path. Check routed path.
I have no idea.
Holy crap!
That's a fair question.
Did you ever do API reviews in V1, or did we just ship whatever we had? Toolbox item attribute. That seems
well, it's
something
pretty.
But if we want to be able to have it so they can just compile,
Yeah, but in order to actually provide that, do they not need to actually implement something from the toolbox?
I think
yeah,
these-
you need
these
the
makes-
toolbox.
probably.
So you're like disappointing the answer that.
But that applies to all of the things.
Well, I mean, no, I think the scenario for this is like you have a UI control. You want to register it in the toolbox. So then you put basically the stuff, the attribute on your UI control class to actually indicate how it appears, I think. So
Well,
like,
no,
since
whether
there's
it
no
appears.
portable way to write a UI control, like there's no point in exposing those attributes.
Doesn't have to be UI control, but ground worker is in the toolbox as well.
Sorry, so anything that you can design on the design surface, but that would require at least component, which we don't have, or you need to derive from control, which we also don't have. So I would go with there's no portable way to have toolbox items.
But that one is much more common. If someone is porting a designable library to CoreFX, chances are they have this attribute.
Would they be able to put this on there without having derived from component or actually form or control or any of those things? These are always going to be on some UI.
Well, there is no reason to put it not on a component.
And these don't seem general purpose enough to be used for other scenarios like some of the other ones might be. That's the difference between them.
I honestly think, like, if you look back at what we would do moving forward, I don't think we would have designable components. I think we will have designable UI controls. But I think, like, the old idea where you grab a SQL connection and put it on your component tray, I think we will no longer build this kind of stuff, because that's just not the way people should write code.
All right, looks like that's all.
Yep, I think it's.
Did we expose warning exception, by the way?
Apparently,
Yeah.
we did.
Do we know what it's used for?
I think I know what's useful. I was not joking when I said I think it's essentially message box exception. I think if you throw it at design time, they just show it to you instead of crashing the ID.
So maybe it's something that we should plan on not exposing unless we find a reason.
Yeah, it looks like I can only find it used in WinForms right
I think
now.
warning exception is like very close to violating at least 5 design guidelines.
Yes, I would exclude it, yes.
Specifies an exception that is handled as a warning instead of an error, which basically means message box exception.
Sure.
Okay.
Right. Good.
Although I have done this before, to be honest. I just called it differently. I don't think we exposed it yet, do we?
No, we don't. I've never even seen it until this video, so.
It's also awesome that's deriving from system exception. Oh god. Clearly we did not get that right in the one.
I think we're done.
Alright, let's not expose warning exception. Alright, I think then that's pretty much it. Good. So what are the next steps then? Basically, I give you that list of nodes. Then I think the idea was that we now have 2 contracts, right? We have the short term and then we have the long term, right? And we said for the short term, we should
Actually, looking at this was the long-term diff, right? So
Yes,
it
this
looks
is
like
the
there was a lot more to be on, so do we need to do it in two pieces? I don't know how much more work there is.
But to be clear, the difference between the short term and the long term was pretty big. That was the other diff we looked at, which was...
Well, the short term's on the order of something.
So
like
this is
8
basically
minutes.
the diff between full framework and long term.
Yeah.
So if you look at, I think, this one? Yeah, this one. So that's the diff between short term and long term, and that's like 447 editions.
Yeah, but how they actually hard editions as well.
I think a lot of the hard work's in that short term. We can take a closer look.
Yeah, so I mean, like a lot of these, we also said remove, like don't add data, don't add the warning exception, like some of those.
Yeah.
It might be worth trying to see if we can get them all in, so we don't have to postpone it.
Yeah, that's true too.
But if we find large gaps, so there's an extra amount of work, then we can postpone.
Yep.
Okay.
So as a minimum, we should at least expand the short term to all the members unless proven guilty, right? And then for the remaining types, it may be easier actually to just start with the full thing and then just cut back rather than piecemeal.
Okay.
You have to like go up the list all the time. Okay, but now let's assume we have the contract. Then what are we planning on doing? We add this to the repo, hook up API compat, I guess. Wes?
Sorry, what?
So like as far as next steps go, like we would add the contract to a repo. We would make sure that it has API compat hooked up. People can start filling in the gaps. Is that basically the next
We don't
step?
have API hooked up in the open yet, but yeah, just basically you can create the contracts in CoreFX. These are already existing contracts, so you
Just add the members to it.
APIs to those contracts.
All you do is like copy paste C# code, or is there a different way to?
Well, you can run Gen API. If you have a assembly that has them, it's easier just to run Gen API, which drops out a CS file with the reference assembly. You will need the version. Both primitives and type converter will have to be bumped up in version to 4.1, I guess now, because I think because I'm now exposing new APIs.
Why you do this?
Yeah, that's another way.
Yeah.
And so should we do this in our own fork of it?
Yeah, so just do the work on a fork of CoreFX, and once it's ready, submit PR.
Ready as in everything implemented?
God no, like have the contract in,
Okay.
have it built.
Yes, we need to make the CoreFX build be in a steady passing state, so we don't
Sure.
want to.
Okay. But we don't need to wait till we have everything from component model to get that put in. We can do it piecemeal, because that way we can get more people working on it probably.
Well, what it would do is that would at least have the contract in.
Sure.
So the contract, I think, needs to be in. Whatever we want the contract to be should be in fully.
We need to be a little careful about that because we're going to be forking for different branches and shipping. We ship CoreFX holistically, and I don't want to ship it in a half-baked state.
Is there if we create a branch kind of like dev metadata, has there like a branch where they do
You
work?
can do it in a fork too. Multiple people can work on it. You just have to agree on which fork you want to do it on. So
That would go with branches much easier. As in like, oh, the official copy of component model happens to be in T Southwick / master.
That's the thing that
I don't know.
that's the thing I was kind of wondering about.
if you think it's going to take a while, sure, we can create a dev branch. But
It seems more like
and how many people we think working on it? Just
The two of us for right now, and then if there are maybe community members that would be interested.
I mean, I have a decent list of people that wanted to help out with porting as part of the interview process, and I wanted to reach out to them anyway. So I think if we have a plan where we can say, here's the branch, here's the guidance, so we want to go about it. But I think in order to make that useful, like, should we wire up API port, or should we just say, don't change the contract?
Well, API compat is in the process of being wired into our build system.
So we should
We just haven't. It's just not there yet.
Okay.
You can run it manually yourself for now, but like just making the contract and then starting to fill it in is sort of incrementally. You can do that.
And the whole thing is on reference source, I believe, right? So there should
Yes.
be no.
Yes.
So I think the only thing we should probably write down is that, copy and paste the code from reference source, run the source formatter tool, so we have the right copyright in and the source looks the way it should be, and then submit piecemeal commits.
Yeah. We shouldn't merge that branch back into master until it's done.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. How is Bert? Oh, go ahead.
I'm just curious, who determines when it's done?
Well, once the contract is fully valid, we've got the final version of it, we kind of just stamped off, and the APIs are actually there. We've got the test coverage covering those APIs.
Who's doing the test?
If we have test.
The test,
There's links to some of the old tests, so we're going to go through that, see what we can get.
part of the requirement to get into CoreFX, you must have test coverage for your library. So.
So the plan is that we will do that.
Code coverage is not, is probably not 100%.
We'll find.
I mean, especially you will not get any coverage for design time pieces that you're pulling in.
Well, I mean, I would hope that type converter and type descriptor are things that are relatively easy to at least mock up test, where you already get pretty much, if you just do the naive hello world, you probably get already like 60% test coverage, because you touch enough pieces anyway.
The real implementation, the real part that you are actually implementing, yes, that is actually covered in our tests, like add provider, get properties, remove provider, get properties. That's the basic scenario. This is covered in our tests.
Yep.
So you will not be able to copy paste completely the test, but you will be able to pull out the steps.
Well, that's what I meant. Like if you have like, even if you're very naive, like 10 and 10 tests that do the the very basics of the type descriptor, you will probably already touch large chunks of your code. Like I mean, and then it's just walking the long tail. But I mean, most of our code coverage I think doesn't exceed 60% anyway. Like I mean, we have a bunch of things that are still 65, 67%, which is not that hard to.
The community also likes helping fill in test caps. So.
So at one point you had mentioned being able to run it against desktop instead of against core. Is that enabled right now in CoreFX V1?
What will happen is once you define the contracts, you'll create a build definition and it'll generate facades. And that infrastructure is in place. You'll just define it as, I need this desktop implementation to be a facade. And then once you run on the desktop, as long as you have the facade and along with your dependencies, then you'll be able to run that on desktop as well.
I don't think we have a way to run the tests on both sides.
Running the tests on desktop right now in the open is not something we have there yet.
Well, can we do it in general?
You can try. I mean, you can attempt to do it. Like this is new. Our infrastructure is not set up to do it. People do it manually right now.
Okay.
Yeah. You can basically write a simple console or something, or unit test that's targeting desktop, and then run it, point it into your library.
I would generally say like once we have enough implemented and like some decent coverage that is not zero, right? I think we can just release preview versions and then just see what people say. I mean, I think in order to get the long tail of behavioral difference between desktop and framework, you need somebody to actually use it. I think there's, like, unless you have super awesome test coverage, which I don't think we have for most of the stuff, I don't think there's, even if you could run the tests on both sides, would we likely find any differences? Probably not.
I was thinking more, if we try to create tests that to fill some of the gaps, it would be nice to be able to verify that the behavior we're coming up with is actually what desktop sees. So, okay.
So then, but you guys are still signed up to actually do some of the implementation, right? Because originally it was like there was no resources at all.
Yeah, Sean wants us to do this.
Perfect. Cool. Then let me just basically write up the notes and then share the notes publicly as you always do, and then so we create a branch then in CoreFX, dev/TypeDescriptor or something. All right. Any questions online? Otherwise, we wrap it up. Let me actually just check. I don't think there was any questions. Nope. All right, guys. Then see you next time.